President out again, railing against the Constitution, railing against the Bill of Rights. That's what we're talking about. The Bill of Rights exists to protect the individual against the central government. The Second Amendment isn't there to protect you and your hunting rights. Second Amendment isn't there to protect you and your sports shooting rights. The Second Amendment is there to protect you from a centralized government. I don't mean to be provocative, but that's the history. That's why there's a Second Amendment. The militia part of the Second Amendment underscores this point. Of course, the left doesn't comprehend this. They don't comprehend much. And that is that the states could maintain militias. To do what? To protect themselves against an oppressive, tyrannical central government. The Second Amendment is quite a remarkable thing, isn't it? The First Amendment is also there to protect your religious liberty rights, the right to association, the right to free speech, the right to a free press. The Fourth Amendment exists for, among other reasons, to ensure that you have due process, and not just in criminal cases, but against, and now, today, a massive administrative state that issues regulations with all kinds of criminal penalties, laws that you're not even aware of, issued by people you never supported, in departments whose names you don't know. And yet, if somehow you violate one of the nearly 1 million pages of regulations that have been issued in the last 11 or 12 years, in many cases you are strictly liable and criminally liable. Whatever happened to due process? Oh, well, you'll be able to go to court. It's more than that. The Takings Clause. Have you ever heard of the Takings Clause of the Fifth Amendment? The purpose of the Takings Clause is to protect your private property. Have you ever heard of it? Then, of course, the Ninth Amendment. The left, the right, the courts, they never even talk about the Ninth Amendment. Why in the world would the first Congress propose 12 amendments to the Constitution, send them to the states ratify 10 of them, and include this Ninth Amendment if it's meaningless? You know what the Ninth Amendment is from my perspective? That's the Declaration of Independence Amendment. Unalienable individual rights. Enshrined in the governing document, the Constitution. It was that important. And then, of course, the 10th Amendment is dismissed. It's mocked. It's utterly non-existent. The 10th Amendment underscores state sovereignty, state authority. It's called federalism. Now, although the Bill of Rights, these 10 amendments, were adopted after the Constitution was ratified, the Constitution would not have been ratified but for the fact that the Federalists represented to the Anti-Federalists in a number of state legislatures that were not going to support this, or state conventions, I should say, that they would come back in the first Congress if the state conventions would ratify this Constitution and adopt what would become a number of these amendments. The Constitution was in deep trouble in New York. It was in deep trouble in Virginia. And it was even in deep trouble in Massachusetts. 3 of the biggest states. And it almost lost in all 3 of those states. It almost lost. Do you believe that the way the federal government conducts itself today, do you believe if that was enshrined in a constitutional document, that that document would have come out of the Constitutional Convention in 1787? No, it wouldn't. If it had come out of the Constitutional Convention, do you believe that a single state ratification convention would have voted to ratify? No, it wouldn't. There's no way Massachusetts, New York, or Virginia would have ratified such a constitution. None. And this is the law of the land. These are the parameters for our government. Not we the people. These are the parameters for the government. So when Barack Obama continues to go to the microphone, mocking individual liberty, mocking the Constitution, mocking the Bill of Rights, he demonstrates day in and day out his totalitarian mindset. All we need to do, ladies and gentlemen, is continue to surrender our liberty, our security, and our property to Barack Obama and central government, and somehow we'll be safer. Somehow some nut job wouldn't be shooting up schools. If we were just less free, if our Constitution wasn't in the way, somehow we'd be living in paradise. Isn't that amazing? Now, under the First Amendment, religious liberty, it's under attack under this president. Under the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms, it's under attack under this president. Due process rights, under attack, with the EPA and the rest of the federal Leviathan stretching its power from sea to shining sea. The takings clause of the Constitution has been written out of the Constitution by this president, by the courts, and by Congress. Private property rights mean nothing. The Ninth Amendment, unalienable rights. When is the last time you heard this president, or any Democrat president, or any Republican Congress talk about unalienable rights in the Ninth Amendment? Never. And of course, the 10th Amendment has been utterly destroyed. The states are nothing more than essentially appendages of the federal government. They've been bought off with grants. They've been bought off with programs. And Republican governors like Kasich, like Chris Christie, and a host of others, while claiming to be conservatives, while claiming to be constitutionalists, accept each and every piece of bait that's flopped in front of them like a flounder, selling out federalism, selling out their states, whether it's Medicaid or something else. They've made a shambles of the Bill of Rights, which are there to protect you. Then we get to the 14th Amendment. The 14th Amendment, one of three post-Civil War amendments. The 13th, 14th, 15th Amendments, intended to do one thing and one thing only, to make absolutely certain, once and for all, enshrined in our greatest law, that black people were to be treated as people, as human beings. And now the 14th Amendment is used to promote a particular point of view on marriage, or another particular point of view on income equality, and 1,000 other things. Suddenly the 14th Amendment is the left's magical amendment, where any part of their agenda is poured through it, as if that's what was intended in 1868 and thereafter. Then there's Article 1, Section 8, Clause 3, the Commerce Clause of the Constitution. The Commerce Clause. Do you know why we have a Commerce Clause in the Constitution? Before they met in Philadelphia, a number of delegates were sent to meet in Annapolis, Maryland, but not enough to have a quorum of the colonies, or the states, if you will. And they were meeting there for the primary reason of trying to figure out how to advance what? Commerce and trade. Because of the parochialism of the states, taxing their neighbors' goods, obstructing navigation on shared rivers. They were trying to figure out how to create a commercial society, a trade society, to compete with these foreign governments, the British and the French. And so they would later meet in Philadelphia at what became known as the Constitutional Convention. But Article 1, Section 8, Clause 3, the Commerce Clause. So perverse has our government become that rather than promoting commerce and trade, rather than promoting free market capitalism, that clause is now used as a justification to destroy them, to empower the bureaucracy. Article 1, Section 9, Clause 7 of the Constitution, the power of the purse. There was much debate at the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia about what branch would do what once they decided what they would look like, and within Congress, which house would do what. And it was determined that the House of Representatives, the spending bills would start there, the tax bills would start there, the borrowing would start there. And yet it doesn't start there. When you have an imperial president, when you have a feckless Congress, the president decides spending. The president decides taxing. The president decides borrowing. The entire system's been turned on its head. The framers would never have supported that. The ratifying conventions would never have supported that. They created this executive branch. And yet they created all these balances and checks and separation of powers. And later they would add the Bill of Rights to keep the government in check, to keep the president in check. Is he in check? Is he in check? Article 2, Section 2, Clause 2 of the Constitution, the Treaty Clause. There was much discussion about this. And there was much writing about this in the Federalist Papers, particularly Alexander Hamilton. It is unequivocal. It is without debate that the framers of our Constitution and the ratifiers at the state conventions rejected the idea that one man, this newly created president, that this one man could lock the entire nation into an arrangement with foreign governments without the support of the American people generally. And they decided the way that they were going to address this was that, yes, the President of the United States could negotiate these arrangements, but they would not be binding on the United States of America, and they would not be binding on the people of America until it went through an elaborate process. And that process included the presentation of a treaty to the United States Senate. The United States Senate at the time represented by the state legislatures, so that a sober, mature, thoughtful consideration could be made of any deal that would lock the United States in with other countries and other arrangements with other countries. And so they made a threshold. 67 out of 100 senators. Of course, there weren't 100 senators back then. 2/3 of the senators present, they said, would have to vote to ratify the proposed treaty presented by the President of the United States. The treaty clause has now been destroyed as well. It's been destroyed. And I watch Obama today as he's trashed one part of the Constitution after the other. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 3. Article 1, Section 9, Clause 7. Article 2, Section 2, Clause 2. The First Amendment, the Second Amendment, the Fourth Amendment, the Fifth, the Ninth, the 10th, the 14th. And nobody says a damn thing. Not a damn thing. I'll be right back.
Mark Levin.